Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Web Programming Lecture number 3. And today's tutorial, we're just going to finish off the HTML material and have a look at creating a form which was originally part of assignment 2, but I've actually moved it to assignment 3 just to make things a little bit more even. But as soon as assignment 3 is approved, I will definitely release assignment 3, so anyone who wants to get a jump on assignment 3 tasks can have a look at the form. So how is everyone? So first of all, I just want to make sure everyone's aware that assignment 2 has been approved and released. And I've got a question from Sani here saying, how can you see if you've done any pulls or push? Can I just get your student number, Sani, and I'll just see how you're going. So I have marked a few students. So some of you early birds, you'll have your assignment 1 mark back. Quite a few of you are just missing some small thing like the image is not correctly named or some deprecated HTML needs removing. And just have a look at Sani here. So I'm just accepting your invitation, Sani. I can see you've got 5 commits. So yes, you've made 2 updates. So one is called "This is to update htaccess" in WinSCP. Hopefully that hasn't actually come through though. Let me just check that. No, that looks like you don't have htaccess, and that, trust me, is a good thing in your Git repository. And I'm just checking your other commit was just adding the avatar PNG size. Yeah, so yours looks quite good, and I'm just checking your assignment as it stands. So at the moment, your elephant is still a little bit too big, so you do need to resize that down to a 200 by 200 pixel image. So Nathan's asked a question: if you submit a draft early, honestly, everyone who hasn't got 5 marks has had a little statement saying, "Let me know when you're ready for a remark." So yeah, it's my intention that everyone should get 5, because if you don't get 5 in assignment 1, that will affect your assignment 2, 3, and 4 grades. Oh, actually, thank you, Samuel. Now, yes, if you type in git status, it will tell you whether your repository is up to date. And if you type in git pull, that means you'll pull down any changes from your GitHub account. But you really only have to worry about that if you've started to develop locally and you're making some changes offline on your personal laptop or desktop. Okay. Yeah, so assignment 2, just I'll just sort of introduce it properly. So the idea is that a small cinema business called Lunado has engaged you to develop a website. Their cinema has only got a single screen, so you don't have to worry about multiple movies screening at multiple times. And the idea is that they're not trying to compete with the big chains. They're just trying to make a sort of bit of a boutique experience and just appeal to people, letting them know that their faculties have been upgraded, so they're not a rusty old or musty old cinema anymore. They've got some modern facilities, and that they should, reconsider coming to their cinema rather than just driving to another town to see something in IMAX experience or gold class or something. So the idea is they've got some new seats, so they've got some first class seats which are comfier, but they've also got some standard seating as well. So it's important that, first of all, it's a single page website. Certainly for the most part, it's a single page website. And what we'll have is large sections. So an About Us section, followed by something about their prices. And as you scroll down, it would be nice if the background is sufficiently different so that it's clear that each section is separate from the previous. And at least one of those sections should have a parallax image where the image is static in the background and the content sort of moves up. So so the first one is really just sort of setting up, mainly getting the HTML correct and the CSS as well. And as I said, as soon as assignment 3 is approved, you can basically have a look at the simple form, which we're going to cover tonight. And people can then book a film, book a time, and then tell you how many seats of each type that they want. And then assignment 3 will be a JavaScript task, so you can update the prices as they're making changes. But more about that once assignment 3 is approved. So the marks on the back, I have been told there may be some small changes, but what I want to do, if there's time, I want to close that. I want to go through this Bloom's taxonomy guide. So the content in this document is going to be quite relevant for all courses and all assignments. So the school is having a little bit of an audit, just making sure that our tasks meet some more advanced cognitive goals, as well as just your simple point and click, as I like to call them, rudimentary tasks. So coming back now to the tutorial. So activity 1 is about forms and form submission. So in lecture 2, we finish off with a form attribute, a form element. And the 3 main attributes that go inside a form are the action, that is, where is the form data going to go? The method by which it's going to be transmitted over the internet back to the server. And there's a JavaScript event listener called onSubmit. And what you can do there is you can get JavaScript to run a quick check on your form, make sure everything is correct, and only if everything is correct do you allow submission of that form data to the server. And what this does, and this is a bit of an advanced preview of material we'll be coming up on, is if you get JavaScript to check the form, you're actually getting the client's computer to do a quick check before you bother the server with any information that may or may not be relevant. So as much as possible, we try and get the client's computer, to do the work, so the server doesn't have to do a lot of the work. So I've got the first question: what goes inside the action attribute? That's basically the URL of the processing form, the processing script. And in the assignment, what I do is ask you to, okay, not this assignment. In assignment 3, what I ask you to do is to set the action attribute to be the testing script. So what I've got there is I'll supply a script for you, and that script will give you some feedback on how well your form is going. So there are two ways that data can be transmitted using HTTP or HTTPS. There's the POST method, which is more secure. Maybe I should reverse these two. So the POST method is quite secure. Information goes inside the body of the request. And if you're using HTTPS, what that means is the form data is going to get encrypted, which is very handy. However, if the data is not so important, it's more like writing on the back of a postcard. So if you actually have a look inside your URL, even though it's not quite obvious, what's happening is Google is sending some information using the get method. So it's requesting this particular document. And I don't think you'll have the word edit, but because I've got edit access, it's giving me edit access using this little script here. So even though it's not 100% obvious that this is actually a get header, this little bit here, but the data I'm sending, so if I was to make changes here, that would probably be sent using a post request, a more secure method of sending. So I've got a little bit here, discuss the benefits of each method. Think of some examples of where you would use one rather than the other, and I think I'll throw that over to you guys just to maybe throw out a couple of suggestions. And whilst you're thinking, I'll actually pull up an example off screen. So Matthew's saying get a place in a web application. Yep, you may have hit on what I've just opened, but I won't tell you what I've opened just yet. So Matthew's saying an anchor style. So are you sort of submitting information to get an anchor style? I'm not quite sure I understand your suggestion there, Matthew. So if you think about it, it's like you're filling in form data and you're going to submit that data to a processing script. When might you use get? When might you use post method? Okay, Tim's saying get for search. Yep. As long as you're not searching for this is good. Jeremy saying something trivial. Yep, like a public transport journey planner. Peter's saying post for card payment. Peter's definitely hit that on the head there. So I'm just pulling in Google Maps. So this is Melbourne. And if you actually zoom in and zoom out, you can tell that the Again, these are get headers. So if you like, the file might be google.com/maps. There may be an index.php or probably ASP or something page there. And these are actually get headers being transmitted. Maybe, I think. So I'm just waiting for my assignment form to come up. So, but in the chat, the thing that students have identified is get is for something that doesn't matter. It's not sensitive, and you can also bookmark. You can bookmark something if it's in the get header. So I can bookmark not just this page, but also this page with these headers. And that's something you wouldn't want to do, say, with something sensitive, like maybe banking information or something like that. So, and that's one of the danger things. So at the moment, so this is the, I'll just post the link in the window, chat window. So what I'll want you to do is to post your form data to this script, and this script will have a look at your data and will give you feedback on how accurate it is and whether you need to change anything. So at the moment, nothing's being submitted, but as soon as you start creating your own form and you say action equals this URL. So if I say something like A equals B and C equals D, that's actually that's simulating a form using the get method, and two form elements, one with name A that has value B and one that has name C that has value D. And just make that a little bit wider so you can see what's going on. So these are key value pairs, and I can have as many of those as I like. And this is something that's you don't need to worry about too much at the moment, but one thing you can accidentally do, and I'll just demonstrate. If you were to write just check form, and that was to return false, nothing would happen. The data would get transmitted to the server anyway. But if you say return false, so if you say on submit equals return check form, then that will block submission of any form data where the form data doesn't pass the JavaScript check. So inside a form, once we've got the, if you like, the sort of container for all the form elements, then the sort of the main most popular type is a form that takes a single line of text, and its input type equals text. And what you have is you have that name and value. So you give a field a name, and either the user will enter in a value, or in the case of radio buttons or checkboxes, the developer will supply a value to transmit. So I've got a couple here. These are, if you like, your fairly simple types. So we've got input type equals text, type equals password, type equals hidden. Would anybody like to explain what they would see if these were present in a web form? So Nathan's, I'm guessing you're identifying the password. So if you have input type equals password, anything a user inputs, you'll see little dots appearing. So there's a small security issue. Someone can tell how long your password is. In fact, but that's so commonplace now. I have to warn students when they're using Unix for the first time that you won't actually see dots appearing when you're entering your password. It's a small security risk, but it's not too big. Arimith is saying text is normal writing. So, yeah, completely plain. And hidden is definitely invisible, but would you see a box with no text inside? Actually, Peter's given it away. Hidden shows nothing on a page. So you wouldn't even see that input. And in the third assignment, there are going to be some hidden fields. So as the user is making selections, they're going to be setting some hidden fields. So that's just a bit of a heads up of what's going to happen in assignment 3. Now I'm hoping everyone has seen radio inputs and checkbox inputs. Would anybody like to just explain what the difference between radio inputs and checkbox inputs are? And maybe, perhaps an application where these two types of inputs might be relevant. So Aramis is hit the nail on the head. So radio, you only get one choice. So if you make another choice, the previous choice is unset. Whereas checkboxes, you can have 0 or more choices. Yep, so I'm seeing a lot of good answers. And even physically, basically a round input with a dot inside, that's usually a sign that it's a checkbox. Sorry, a radio button. And a checkbox is usually a square box with a tick inside. So one thing, if you've got a checkbox where it's just a simple sign me up to your mailing list or something like that, you can just have a name equals whatever the name of the input is. But if you are submitting multiple checkboxes, so for example with a pizza website, let's just say you've got toppings. So you'd have toppings with square brackets so that users can select cheese, extra ham, extra anchovies, etc. And if you forget to do that, basically only one of those toppings will come through. So it's very important when you're submitting multiple items that you use the square brackets. I'm not sure if this is required in other languages, but I do know with PHP, it doesn't pick up on multiple variables. But I have made a suggestion that you may have a website that uses radio buttons, and then another website that may use checkboxes with regards to gender selections. Samuel's just asked the question, is this for an array? That's 100% correct. These square brackets just denote that an array of information is going to be coming through. So that can either be a numerical array or it can be a like a hash map array coming through. So I'm just going through everyone's answers, making sure no one has answered the question yet. No, I can't see one yet. Okay, I'll either be talking over people's answers when this comes through. So radio buttons, one of the good examples I can think of was just recently, I went to the doctor and had to put down my gender. So they're really only expecting one gender for me to put down, whatever that gender is. Whereas, let's just say a dating website or some other sort of website where you're looking for, you could then select multiple genders if you are not exclusively monosexual. You can have multiple checkboxes there. And I think if you do look at most websites, most dating websites, they do have that. Even Facebook, I think, even has that in their profile settings. And then finally, and please note that in all cases, this is input type equals, so it's definitely the workhorse of the of your form elements, your input tag. If you have an input and the type is a submit type, then what will happen is a little submit button will get drawn in your form. If you have a reset button, what that will do is it'll actually reset any input that you've put into your form, and I'll have a chat about that shortly. And then another type is type equals button, and that basically isn't so much an input as really just a button that just sits in your form that you might want to wire up to some JavaScript. So one thing I springs to mind is like a sort of calculation button. So if you're writing something, we just pull up something. So this is my scrappy homepage, and every now and then I'll write something. So for example, I've been looking for a monitor for my desk, and they'll tell you something in inches, and 1080. And so what I've got here is I've got an input type equals button. It doesn't do any submission, but when you click calculate, it basically tells you how big this monitor or TV is going to be on your desk, and also tells you how big the pixels are going to be as well. So that's an example of a calculator button that you might have in a form that's not necessarily a submission button. So I'm just scrolling down. So are there any questions about the input element? I think everybody's pretty much on the ball. Okay, I'm not getting any answers, so questions. So I'll now scroll down to the more exotic input elements that have been around for a long time. So these elements have been around since, I would say, at least HTML version 4 and XHTML as well. So these controls, these aren't a simple empty input tag. So notice the input is just a single element. There's no, make sure you don't do this. That's bad. So these are paired paired elements. So what you'll have is you'll have an opening tag and you'll also have a closing tag. And a text area is an input where you will be allowing more than one line of data. So instead of just entering a name or a password, you'll be entering in something like so let's just say a form that sends an email to someone without showing the email address, or in Facebook, you've got your blog posts or something like that. As soon as an input area allows you to put data on more than one line, that's usually a text area, unless they're doing something really tricky. So one thing text areas allow you to do is to specify the number of rows. So if you want 5 rows to be visible or 4 rows to be visible, you just specify how many. I think the default is 3 in most browsers, but that can vary. And also how many columns. And the columns are how many characters wide it's going to be. So obviously with monospace fonts, that works very well. But for proportional space fonts, it's not 100% accurate. So if you type 100 I's, that's going to take up a different amount of space to 100 W's, for example. So we still have the name here, but basically anything that's between here is the default text or the default value that is pre-typed. So if you want to put something into a text area that's there before the user starts typing, and this is text that stays there, not placeholder text. We'll be looking at that shortly. Put some text in there, but most of the time it's probably advisable just to leave that empty. And also put the closing tag on the same line. Otherwise, you'll get white space in your input elements. So that's the text area, which is a multi-line text field. And you can also control the height and width using CSS as well, which we'll be looking at very soon. Another element most people are familiar with is the select tag, which can generate a drop-down field. So a fairly common one is, Mr., Mrs., Miss. So you want the user to select from predefined values rather than entering in their own values. And the advantage here is the select, if you like, the parent element has the name attribute, but the value attributes go inside each option. So if you have multiple options, each option has its own value. And what the user sees, so the user might see something more friendly, something more human friendly, whereas the computer will see something that's different. So something that's less descriptive. So if you're writing for a let's just say an online website, you might put the product code inside the value, but then you might put a description of the product, which is what the human wants to see. Now, if you can actually turn a drop-down box into a combo box, which means more than one option is displayed at any one time. All you have to do is specify a size attribute, and you can say 2, 3, 4, or however many you want. And if there are more options than the size, then you'll get a small scroll bar on the right, so they can then scroll down and see more. And finally, just to round out the select box, there's also a multiple attribute. So you can just specify the word multiple inside a select box, and that will also turn your drop-down box into a combo box. And in XHTML, we had to do this, which was irritating. But in HTML5, we can now just say multiple, which is much nicer. So when you're doing this, if you are using multiple, it's a good idea to use square brackets. Sorry, I'll pop them there. So whatever your name is, if you're expecting multiple values, make sure you put in some array brackets so that the processing script knows that an array of information is going to come through. Otherwise, it'll only send one of these selected values through. So are there any questions on the traditional paired elements? I think I've missed one, actually. So there's also the button element, which I'll just pull up. Actually, I'll pull that up in the lectures. So not only do we have an input type equals button element, but we also have a paired button element, just to make things confusing. And what this allows us to do is we can then put HTML inside a button element so that it's prettier. So the input type equals button only gives us a single line of text, and what's in the value is printed in the button. But when you use the button element, what's displayed in the button is different to the value, which it's definitely handier to have. Now, one of the problems is, for whatever reason, I don't know why this happened, the default type for a button, so you say input type equals button, the default type is a submit button, so it's really stupid. I don't know who made that mistake. I really think it is a mistake in the standard. So if you just want a button to be a button, you actually have to say button type equals button for it to be just a plain button. But if you want a fancy submit button, this is the way to do it. So no questions regarding the paired elements? And so the final important field, actually, I will say I'm going to put in field set as well. So field set groups elements together. So you, if you put elements inside a field set, pop in a legend, and the legend will appear just here. And then you can sort of put some elements that belong together. So something like about you can say first name, last name, and just so you don't have one giant form which has got heaps of unrelated elements together. Now labels are very good for accessibility, as well as providing search engines with contextual information. So one standard, I would say slapdash way of creating a label is just to put in a name inside a paragraph and then pop in an input element right after it. But even though search engines might be smart enough, there's no real connection between this text and this input element. Whereas if you pop in a label, first of all, you indicate that this name is a label for an element, for an input element, and to make a direct connection between the element and the input, if you type in for equals name, that will be a label that's related to the input with the ID name. And the advantage for accessibility is whenever you click on this label, the cursor will be put into the relevant text box, which is very handy because it makes the click area larger. You're not just popping, you don't have to just click the input element. You can click the label as well as the input element. And for when it comes to checkboxes and radio buttons, this is very, very important. It makes your web form more accessible. So this is an example where you want the element to come before the element, the input element. So you say name, and then it's followed by the input element. But in this example here, what we've got here is the text comes after the checkbox or the radio button. And so when you click on this male or this female or this other label, the associated input element gets selected. And what I've got here is a small note. If there's time, teaching staff will demonstrate some of the new HTML5 inputs. So HTML5 saw a great upgrade to our existing types. So input type equals color is a really nice one. Input type equals date. And for some reason, input type equals month. I have asked for this in the assignment, in assignment 3. For some reason, some browsers are really dragging their heels on this, even though it should be fairly easy to implement. And that allows you to input a month rather than a specific date. And very, very handy for credit cards. So Tim Carter, you asked a question about what's coming up with regards to the booking form. I will be asking you to input a credit card and also an expiry date. And this field is one of the fields that you can use to pop in the expiry date. There's an input type equals range, which gives you a sort of range element like this one, which is handy. Telephone, these will probably become more important just so search engines know that it's a telephone number that's being requested. And there's this one, I'm not quite sure when you would use type equals week, but I think that allows you to select rather than a whole month, but just say a single row in a calendar. It might be irrelevant. Input, maybe not quite as popular. So let me just pick a good one. So these are the new HTML5 ones. So I'm going to pick this one, which is pretty cool. So all we have to do is say type equals color. And you specify the value in the 24-bit color. So the not 16-bit, sorry, not 16, 12-bit color, where you've just got 16 steps with each channel. This gives you 256 steps with each channel, including 0. And what happens is, depending on which browser you're using, you'll get different input sliders. I think there's crayons here as well if you're using a Mac. And when you submit that, the actual color in hexadecimal will come through. So just to remind you, 00, that means red channel is off. 96, that means the green channel is on. I don't know, a little above halfway, not too much above halfway, and then FF, which means full blue. So those indigo blue lights are glowing on full power. Notice that this form is using the get method because no method has been specified. So the get method is the default. And we actually see an example of a get header here. So, so we're saying, so when we made this request, we're looking at tryit.asp question mark and file name equals try HTML input color. And that is submitting, basically submitting to a processing script, and the processing script is pulling out the right tried editor example page. Unfortunately, we can't actually see this. So I'm just going to see if I can open this in a new frame. So I'm allowed to view the frame source. Yeah, they're smart. Okay, they're not letting me. So this is actually a page inside an iframe. I was hoping to basically pull this into its own page, but it's not working. But even this is submitting a form, get data to action page.php. So, so closing off tonight's tutorial, are there any questions about today's tute questions or tute material? And whilst I'm waiting for you to answer that, I just want to show you something. It's in the lecture notes. In programming 1 or introduction to programming, whatever your first my programming course was, one thing we do is really emphasize the importance of indentation. So this is an example of a text area with indentation. And the trouble is, and I'm hoping you can see this, that there's a lot of unwanted white space that's found its way into this text area. So if you are putting in some text into the text box, this is one of the problems if you do the right thing and have indentation, because any white space is going to appear inside the text area, which is a bit of a problem, even this empty row as well. So when it comes to HTML and text areas, it's a good idea not to stick with the indentation guide, so to speak. There's one new element which is very handy. So this is what the source code looks like. So I'm going to delete all the text area content, make it nice and clean. And if we pop in a placeholder attribute, placeholder is new for HTML5. So what placeholder does is it puts some text into an empty field. So this is this works for input type equals text, and I think most sort of text-based inputs placeholder text works, but as soon as you start typing, the placeholder text goes away. And then when you delete, I did too much typing there, the placeholder text will come back. And before HTML5, we had to write a JavaScript program that would check the content and pop in some content, or if you started typing, it would then delete that content, and it was rarely right. You could sometimes hop out of the box and pop back in and get the events confused. But placeholder text, this is a great time-saving attribute that was introduced in HTML version 5. Okay, so that's today's tute. So let's just have a look at the lab today. So what I'm sort of hoping you'll do is just have a bit of a play using the required attributes. So if you've got if you specify a field is required, that field can't be blank, and the placeholder attribute uses that sort of gray text when in a blank field, and it will disappear once you start typing. Also like you to have a play to just make sure you know how to turn a drop-down list into a combo box just by using multiple or size equals 2. And just a little bit of information on how, particularly with number fields and date fields as well, you can specify a minimum and a maximum and a step. So if you want your numbers to be, say, just the even numbers or odd numbers, you can specify a step. Or if it's a price thing, the default is step equals 1. So if you need something to be 0.1 or 0.01, you can change this step size to be small as well. So prior to these attributes, we had to have JavaScript doing all of this, and these attributes do make things a lot simpler. So a fairly simple lab for this week. Which basically make sure that you're comfortable with all the new input fields that are available in HTML5. Okay, so what I wanted to do, I was a little bit worried we'd be stretched for time tonight, but I can see that's not going to be the case. So what I'll do is I'll move these comments just off screen, and I'll just flop into full screen mode. Okay, that just made my other screen go blank, so I can't see the questions you're asking. So I just thought what I want to do is explain what the holdup of the assignments is due to. And I actually introduced this a few years ago, back in 2016. And I wanted to sort of just get people thinking beyond just the simple apply and create stage, and to sort of move over to analyze and evaluation. And this is what's just causing our school to be in a little bit of a panic at the moment. I'm sure there are other courses that are experiencing the same problems. And really, the accreditation panel have asked us to make sure that we've got more assessments that are testing your ability to analyze and evaluate and also create, rather than just sort of follow instructions and to apply and to just indicate that you understand and can recall knowledge. So this is going to be fairly important in not just this course, but also other courses, and going forward to next study period and next year as well. So just out of interest, I'll just minimize the screen. Has anyone heard of Bloom's taxonomy? Is anyone familiar with Bloom's taxonomy? And make this a little bit smaller or bigger. Oops. So when it comes to learning any information or any knowledge in any fields, okay, so Matthew, you're saying that other courses are rating this, which is good. So most people are probably familiar with, whenever you're studying something, there are facts that you need to know, and you start organizing those facts into principles. So you start sort of grouping those facts as parts of patterns, and just so that there are less rules, so your facts conform to certain principles, so you can double check that your facts are correct. And also, how that it's called kinesthetic knowledge. So sometimes you actually have to learn by doing rather than just learning academically. And I was sort of having trouble thinking, what do you do physically in RMIT in web programming? And I do think, well, when you're learning code editors, learning all the shortcut keys, so that that knowledge of what keys you press, all the shortcut keys, that ends up being in kind of like motor memory. In fact, I do know some advanced people who they're very good with Adobe Illustrator and Photoshop, and you ask them, oh, what's the shortcut for blah? And they say, I don't know. I only know how to, they don't actually know how to recall that button combination, but they know what buttons to press when they want it to do something, which I find quite fascinating. And I know it's true of myself that I know how to do something, but I couldn't recall exactly how to do it. So this is like your kinesthetic information. And one classic example is riding a bike. Anyone who knows how to ride a bike should know that it's very hard to communicate what you're doing to someone who doesn't know how to ride a bike. Most bike riding is taught kinesthetically, and it's very hard to teach teach riding a bike, with pen and paper, essentially. And also, one other thing is, we form opinions of how good we are at things. And so that effective, how you see yourself, that's another form of knowledge which can either impede or accelerate your learning. So if you see that this is something that relates to you or that you want to know, learn how to do, that's another thing that can increase your understanding. So, people's attitudes towards whether they're good at design or good at coding or back-end programming, that can also feed into how good you are as well. So all of these 4 branches, and these are, if anyone recognizes this, that's excellent, but it's not necessarily important. But these are sort of gardeners, 4 branches of knowledge, and they sort of build into sort of like an understanding, so you can sort of like recall things and understand things. And it doesn't take long for you to get to the stage where you're able to apply the knowledge and understanding that you've accumulated. So what RMIT, or what our school's been a little bit guilty of, is really only testing your ability to get to the application stage. we put out things, get you to follow steps, and check your ability into recalling things and demonstrating you can follow instructions. And what I've got here is two videos. It's by the same person, and I've got a feeling that they might actually be quite, the talks are quite closely related. But this one is a sort of animated version done on a whiteboard, and this is him actually on stage. But in his chat, he talks about the candlestick problem. And I think this really demonstrates the difference between the lower order thinking, which we've always been testing students on, and the higher order assessments that we are now being encouraged to develop assessments for. So he describes a case which is like a candlestick problem and a candlestick for dummies problem. So one involves literally thinking outside the box in this case and solving a problem, and whereas the other one is very straightforward, I would say. So I encourage you to watch the video to understand the difference between the candlestick problem and the candlestick for dummies problem. So one thing that we've been aware of is, especially during assignments or during exams, we need to be precise, because it's not fair to expect students to guess what we're thinking when we write assignment tasks. But what's going to become more apparent is we're going to have to start writing more candlestick-like problems rather than our candlestick for dummies-like problems. So back in 2016, I was talking about what motivates mastery, and dividing rudimentary tasks which are very mechanical or very up to the application layer level, just remembering, understanding, and applying. But RMIT, we're going to be looking more for your ability to analyze a situation and to basically provide answers to questions that we don't necessarily ask. So we're going to have to write more open-ended questions. And just testing you also on your ability to create. So analyze something, evaluate something, and also your ability, especially in the assignments, to create beautiful things, which I sort of summarize here. So once you've reached the level of where you're able to apply your knowledge, you need to look more closely, break things apart, and sort of really study the knowledge that you've accumulated. And Timothy's saying fuzzy answers. That's definitely the problem we're trying to avoid. It's a sort of catch-22 situation, because every time you do start testing for analysis and evaluation and creativity or synthesis, by definition, the questions have to be more fuzzy and more vague. So it's just something, yeah. As I said, the school is struggling, and I'm still waiting for my some certain questions to be answered so I can release, obviously the later assignments. But I'm hoping that this will give you some idea that we are going to have to be asking questions that are more relevant to this slide. Not 100%, but in the past, courses have been really asking very little of students with regard to these areas, and we're going to have to increase that number moving forward. And obviously, the later your course is in your program, the more important this is going to be. And I'm hoping that, being web programming, it might be an early course for a lot of students, so we might only need a little bit of this to be integrated into assignments. Um, so has what I just said sort of scared anybody? I wouldn't mind generating a little bit of a discussion um, on this topic. So as much as possible, what I do like to do with my assignments or marking guides is I like to have, let me just jump here. I really like to break down my tasks into, one mark. So you know where every mark is going. But you will see something like this. A tasteful color scheme has been employed that has good contrast. That is, if you like, a higher order question, because I'm not saying how you are going to create a tasteful color scheme. I do give you some tips on how to make sure that it's got good contrast, but the tasteful color scheme, use of images and background to make the website interesting and attractive. These I like to think are higher order tasks. And this one as well. Main section backgrounds are distinctive. How you're going to make them distinctive is another matter. And I do have like a simple, where I actually instruct you that one must have this effect. So when we come to the later exams, I will be giving you some advice on, how I also write exams. So what I try to do in an exam, if an exam is worth X number of marks, I'm usually looking for X number of things. So Tim's saying, so you pay little attention to the marking criteria. Okay. I try to make my marking criteria like a checklist, so you can, base, if you're someone who doesn't bother reading marking guides, you can basically go nuts and then come back and sort of go through the marking guide and just check off anything that's obvious, and maybe approach me about anything you're unsure about. But I always dread those questions that say, something like, CSS styling is an important contribution to modern web programming. Discuss, 20 marks or something. I'm really hoping I don't have to write those sorts of questions. I do like, it's especially with markers as well. It's also markers. Markers are looking for guidance as to how to mark questions. And if you leave things too open-ended, then markers are going to form different opinions about what's required. It's hard enough when you specify what's required, let alone when you don't. So. Yeah, look, I won't lie. Tonight's chat went a lot quicker than I thought it was going to. I was worried I was going to have trouble fitting everything in, so I was probably talking a little bit too fast at the beginning of tonight's chat. So, are there any questions with regards to, I would say, this week's lecture, but also next week's lecture? I do ask that you sort of watch ahead. So if you have jumped ahead to the HCI lecture. I'm more than happy to talk about that material. And also any questions with regards to assignment 2. Sonia, yeah, 100% right there. The rote learning is something that it's one of those things. It goes out of favor, and then and then people realize, oh, wait a minute, it's kind of like a bit of a staple. So I'm always worried about exams that are required to be too top heavy and don't actually get you to demonstrate your actual understanding and comprehension of facts and principles. If you think about, I would say, musicians, when they're doing their exams, they usually have to practice a piece that can be highly technical. And obviously you want to pick something that you will play well, but it's not too simple. So again, you have to, if you're a pianist, for example, there's pieces of music out there that maybe 0.01% of the population could play with infinite practice allowed. So you sort of have to pick something that's complex enough, but also achievable. So I'm just, Sonia's posting some nice things here. Even though, I mean, the Bloom's taxonomy, they usually show a sort of like a food pyramid that you have to go through, analyze and evaluate to get to create, to synthesis. But what I find is that I think this is more like it's more like a sort of loop. You'll sort of you'll move on to application and do something a little bit creative, and then you'll analyze what you've created, and then you'll evaluate what you've created, and then you'll create something nicer. And this is sometimes more of a sort of a loop, a continuous improvement thing. If you have looked at the Bloom's taxonomy and seen that sort of pyramid shape, I do find it's a little bit too much like a food pyramid for me. Agile Bloom, yeah, that's if you haven't copyrighted that, Tim, I might actually grab it. Like Scrum Bloom or something. And I know myself, sometimes, I'll be working on something and I'll actually go back to the textbook, and I've noticed I've unlocked, I'll have read something but not realized I haven't really fully understood it. And then you go back and you read it again, and suddenly you understand things without realizing it. I suppose finally, I know it's not really clear, but my color scheme, I've actually tried to make it look a little bit like a tree. And if you think about how plants grow, plants, they'll be sending out down roots, which is like sort of understanding. and they'll also be throwing out a couple of leaves. And as the leaves start, photosynthesizing information, the roots get bigger, and that then just drives more leaf growth. And really, the whole thing about learning is a continuous cycle of improvement. Sani, yeah, this is good to know. Some people are very visual. Actually, I think the majority of people are visual learners, and we'll be looking at this next week when we're designing websites. I know I'm quite strange. I'm very visual, but I'm also I'm someone who happens to like lectures a lot. I'm very oral. If I can hear someone talking, that usually helps me. But I do know people, they just don't bother going to lectures because it's very boring. They can just read it all. But unless I actually have someone talking, I find it quite hard to get that author's voice right. So I just want to thank Sani for saying that. I do think sometimes my teaching materials might be very text-based, so but I'm glad you're enjoying the number of pictures in my lab sheets. Oh, that's interesting. You've said that actually, Tim. I'm sort of reflecting on what you just said about how different things work for different streams. So audio for the humanities. Oh no, Sani, I was I was just commenting on my own experience that I'm one of the few people I know that like lectures. Well, I think a lot of people are, if they cancel lectures and I was a student, I wouldn't know what to do. There's just something about somebody being at the front. Peter's raised a really good point, actually. Yeah, one of the things with ICT is knowledge just keeps changing. So I was sort of teaching myself Angular, and now I'm just getting and just watching all these young people coming up saying, what are you learning that old person's language for? And and you get these camps, people who believe one thing over another thing. ICT is changing all the time. It's very, very hard to keep a tap on what is useful to be learning. So Matthew, you've said higher order on how to evaluate and find facts. Yeah, the candlestick problem. I don't want to give it away, but those two screenshots basically, you know, summarize the problem beautifully. Um, but they did some research on how motivating people. It's almost like a business related topic. How motivating people to do the rudimentary tasks with money or some other material incentives works really well. But testing people's ability to come up with, I would say, creative solutions to problems. Um, so, in order to, as I say here, create useful things or things of beauty, um, it sort of allows you to really look back on the knowledge that you've accumulated and like do that um, second level of evaluation. So there's a expression a lot of authors use, which is killing one's darlings. So if you're writing something, the first thing you do is you get rid of everything that's bad in your book, and then after a while, if you want your work to be beautiful, you have to actually start getting rid of good stuff, stuff that you know is good, but it's just getting in the way of the story. Um, and when it comes to development, like I'm sort of teaching myself React and Ruby at the moment, realizing that you do have to you, I found it very helpful to learn the basics, but it's actually a lot of work tearing down the basics that I've known, and I don't know whether um, younger people who've just gone straight into React programming are actually at an advantage in some ways over me, because they're not cluttered up with knowledge that they think is important. So I've had to reevaluate a lot of principles that I hold dear that React developers don't share. Actually, Sally, I'm just looking at this photo of you with the elephant. I think I've just worked out that it's the picture of an elephant in the corner of a room, I think, and you're sort of standing on the floor or something. I can just see the join at the bottom of the wood log there. Okay, so Lockie's off. So good night, Lockie. See you next week, hopefully. Um, yeah, yeah, developers. I think one thing I'm worried about is how everything's becoming more and more um, automated. Oh no, Sandy, I just want to say no. It's just your pictures on my other screen, and I've just noticed. Um, I couldn't work out whether you were sitting on a swing or not in your picture, but I realized you're actually standing on the floor. Um, it's only because the picture's in my line of sight that I've noticed these things. But you do have to make that picture physically smaller. So maybe the height just needs to be 200 pixels. I've got a feeling it's slightly taller than it is wide. Well, maybe not. Let me just check. Oh, okay. No, currently your picture is 453 pixels by 452. So if you resize that image by, I don't know, maybe about 40%, I think it'll probably be 200 by 200. It just looks taller. Tim, you're asking if we can use jQuery. I'd prefer if you just use JavaScript for the basics, but if you are doing something tricky, like, for example, maybe a modal box or something tricky, then you can use jQuery for bells and whistles. We used to teach jQuery, but we were just finding we were overloading students with lots of information. So what I say is use JavaScript for the basics, but if you're going above and beyond, so into the the higher order tasks, if you actually want to do something above and beyond the assignment specs, then you're definitely free to use jQuery. So, for example, a lot of students will find a slideshow code to have for the movie posters or something, and sometimes that's written in jQuery. Peter, you've asked a very good question. So just to give people a bit of background on jQuery, in the sort of mid 2000s, so between 2000 and 2010, browsers weren't really behaving very well. So jQuery was written to standardize certain effects. So if you wanted your browser to do something, you would have to program it very differently in Internet Explorer to say Firefox. And so jQuery was basically a sort of community that got this sort of standardized. So if you were using Internet Explorer, it would actually call different JavaScript. And so a lot of the reasons why we needed jQuery has sort of fallen by the wayside. And also HTML5 has introduced so many, even just placeholder text. That's something that was introduced in HTML5. So jQuery had a nice little placeholder plugin that you would load. And so I still think jQuery has its place, but a lot of the reasons why jQuery was required have dropped by the wayside. In fact, we're just talking about it at the moment because we're looking at redeveloping web programming for either study period 4 or maybe 2020. I can't believe 2020 is next year. So yeah, we're sort of looking at how much do we want to cram into the course, or how are we breaking up the material. But I do think just getting back to this, when you are building something bigger in out of plain PHP. So, for example, I'm working on a website at the moment that I had a request not to use a framework, and I'm finding I'm pretty much building my own framework just to make things easier. And I know it's not the way to go, but yeah, what's happened is developers have said there's got to be an easier way, and they've sort of created a framework to make things better. So yeah, Timothy's saying Node instead of PHP. I will say that does seem to be the way the market is going. So so Node is basically JavaScript for servers. So JavaScript can then be not only a client-side language, but also a server-side language. And Matthew, yeah, Matthew is talking about MongoDB. For the longest time, we've been teaching, SQL databases and relational tables and foreign keys and all sorts of things. And yeah, someone said, oh, there's got to be an easier way. How about a non-relational database, which used to exist before SQL? When I first started programming, I was actually programming in a non-relational database, and then SQL saved our lives, made database programming so much easier. And now we're kind of going full circle and doing non-relational databases. So it's like, just got to unlearn the last 20 years of material to go for non-SQL database programming or no SQL programming. Yeah, Tim, Big Data is using NoSQL. If you make the the trouble with SQL is, you obviously have to design your database well, and if you introduce a new table, you have to explain to the database how the new table relates to the old table. Whereas big data or big data, they need to it's like all of these data sources need to be independent. And so even though it's still relational, I would say you won't get an error if it's more designed to be relationship friendly than relationship requirement. So I'm thinking of something a bit crude here. Data relationships with benefits rather than strict relationships. Yeah, then you get all these issues about so the thing with SQL database is a lot of time's being spent on getting the indexing right so that it's got that balance between taking up too much memory space and being fast enough to be useful. Okay, so Nathan's saying goodbye. So hopefully I'll see you next week, Nathan. Just quickly, I've got a few people have been requesting assignment extensions. I know I've said this before, but I'll just sort of say it again. So if you do need an extension, it's quite easy to get one. I've just got a form here. If you click on this form, just make your application. Choose one of these, and because of the delay in getting assignment 1 out, I've actually been told to be quite generous. So I don't think there'll be a problem granting anyone who needs an extension an extension. So yeah, so just fill that in, and if you fill that in, it puts everyone's names in one place, so it does make it means that I can go through and there's hopefully a 0% chance I'll miss people, whereas with email there's always a danger I could accidentally lose someone. So Robert, yes, actually, someone sold this in the discussions this week. One of the problems is when you're using CyberDuck or WinSCP, if you drag all the files over by default, all the files come down. So I'm just going to type htaccess. Yeah, this doesn't work. Oh, this is a shame. Which one would it have been under? I think it's under system issues. I think it was it Benjamin? Maybe it was assignment 1. Oops. One little tip: you have to wait for the page to finish loading before the search works. Otherwise, it gets confused. No, it's not here either. That's a shame. See, now it's broken. Anyway, in WinSCP, and I think maybe even CyberDuck 2, you can actually specify that the browser ignores htaccess files. So ideally, what you should be doing is pushing your changes to GitHub, which will automatically ignore your files. Let me just open assignment 1. Not to get the little chart that I'm looking for. Okay, so if you're developing on core teaching and you're always pushing changes to GitHub, that's not too big a problem. Then there's the second method, which is where you push your changes to GitHub and you pull your changes to your laptop or desktop. And then when you finish coding, you push back to GitHub and then you pull back down to core teaching. So let's just say this line, you're not doing that. Let's just say it's, you're pushing and pulling from 2 machines. But if you're doing a direct dump from core teaching to your laptop or vice versa, the problem is you will get htaccess files coming down. So I've set up GitHub to ignore htaccess files, but if you do get them coming down, you will get a server 500 error because your server is looking for RMIT's authentication servers on your laptop, and obviously it's not going to find them. So you just have to go through and delete those htaccess files if they come down. But someone, and I can't remember who, I don't know if it's a Robert or a Benjamin, maybe. I was trying to find the post before. They found a setting that you can actually get WinSCP and or cyberduck to ignore htaccess files. So when you drag and drop a folder, it won't copy over those files. Thanks, Melanie. I think I've may have accidentally created too many chats, discussion threads. Broken it again. Yeah, here we go. Oh, Samuel. So Samuel, if you're in the list, a bit of a shout out to you. Yeah, so this is on WinSCP. So Samuel found a way of stopping the htaccess files from being copied over. So a few clicks, but once you set that up, it yeah, you don't get those pesky htaccess files coming down. So Robert, I don't really mind. You don't need to remove them. The reason why we've got a submission is because RMIT does require a formal submission. So even though we've got GitHub and we can see, you know, your timestamps and everything else, so if there's a problem, there's a lot of safety nets. But if something very bad happens, there is this kind of like official RMIT certified safety net that the assignment that you submit is the assignment that I would send to my, you know, my supervisor. So, you know, sometimes requests reach the court level. You know, there's a lawsuit that's presented, and so obviously RMIT would then use that as the official submission. So make sure you do submit code to Canvas, even though we probably, like, I prefer to mark from from the, I'll say that again. I prefer to mark what's on core teaching, what's being served up. So is Sonny still there? Sorry, Sani, I mean. Or if I can have a volunteer, somebody whose assignment I can use. So what I want to do is just drag the assignment one marking window that I use. But I just want to get your permission before I drag it over. Yeah, so yeah, if there's a htaccess, you know, obviously it can be argued, oh no, that's just an RMIT specific file. Things rarely get to that stage. It only happens very occasionally, but yeah, it's there to protect staff as well as students. Yeah, so I just need a student number and then I can paste that into my marking script. Thanks, Matthew. So let me just refresh this window. Pop, pop. So this is what I'm doing when I'm marking a student. This took me a little while to get right, but so I'll just paste the student number there, hit go. Immediately, the Bitbucket window opens. So I can see, Matthew, you don't have a Bitbucket repository, but you are using GitHub. So I can see you've made 5 commits, and I'll verify that 2 of those are yours. So definitely those 2 are yours. And then I'll have a look at your page. So yep, your home page looks good. You've removed the deprecated HTML4 like code, which is good. This page is working. I can see A1 is unprotected. That's good. And then A2, A3, and A4, they're all protected. Your image is 200 pixels by 200. 5 out of 5. So if you haven't, I think I marked you earlier today, actually, Matthew. So there'd have to be a very strange reason why I couldn't mark you, for example. But let's just say you had forgotten to do a task and have given you 0.1 as a temporary mark. Then if you like your official RMIT submission, let's just say I fall under a bus or something, you can then say, I only got 0.1. I deserve at least 4 out of 5. Someone else can then mark your official submission. Yeah, so Peter's, A1, if you've protected your WP directory, I don't mind too much. As long as A2, A3, and A4 are protected. It's very important that you protect those, just from an RMIT policy point of view. But assignment 1 is really just making sure that you have completed, some basic setup tasks. Okay, so Matthew, you say you're having some issues with committing. Yes, I'm more than happy to help you if you need help, Matthew. That's Matthew with 2 T's. So if you actually, Peter's given you probably the most common cause. So let me just open up brackets. Yeah, so when you start getting into the when you start developing on more than one machine, there's this button here, git pull. So when you hit git pull, that pulls any changes that are in the cloud, if you like. So if you have got some changes that are in your GitHub account, you'll get a message saying hopefully that they've been integrated. But at the moment, because I am up to date, it's I don't need to make any changes. So if I made some changes and then I committed and pushed, I shouldn't have any conflicts. I'll just check because sometimes I forget to update. Oops, idiot. Just open the right program there. Okay, so I'm in the WP public lectures folder. So I'm just going to type in git status just to see how that is. So it's saying that my local repository in core teaching is fine. So if I type in git pull, there's a chance there might be some no, not today, obviously, but there is a chance that I might have had some changes on in my GitHub account that I hadn't pulled down, but I am getting that message. So I've been very good and very very not absent-minded. But if you have a look at my Git history, you can see that sometimes I have made that mistake, forgetting to pull before I commit. Okay, so Matthew, it's looking like that's not the problem. So I'm just curious what your changes are. I mean, have you added? I suppose that's the other thing. When you do make changes, you can tick this box, and that will add all the changes, and then you hit commit. That might be another. I'm just wondering where the problem might be. Okay, so Matthew, you're saying that you're doing a clone. I'm just wondering whether the problem is you're trying to clone over the top of a WP folder that already exists. I think you should be just doing a git pull when you're on core teaching. And if you can't select commit, that's usually I suppose if you email me a screenshot, so if there are changes that you need to commit. Okay, this does sound tricky if that's what's going on. One thing you can do, this is, sometimes it's jammed and I'm too impatient to sort it out. I'm just opening up my repository now. Let me just open the basic one. WP. So if you go to your GitHub account, you can force a change through. So I'm currently looking at, say, my index.html file. What I would do if I was in your case, I would scroll down, see whether, I'm trying not to give this, I'm trying not to give the answer away. Oh, but there might be, I don't know, some deprecated code around here. verify that the version on GitHub is the most up to date, or the version on your machine is the most up to date. Work out which one's the right version. So let's just say the version on your computer is more up to date. I would then, did I close brackets? So what I would do is let's just say it's the one here. I would select all the code and then come to GitHub, select the edit button, select all the text, delete it, and paste your text. And then when you come down, you can actually commit changes. So you can just say, forced update due to brackets problem or something. And when you commit those changes, you could then pull that version down. And what will happen is GitHub and the Git repository on your machine, they'll see that they're both in sync. And so you should get a message saying fast forward update or something like that. So yeah, work out which one is the most up-to-date one, and then just force that change through by just doing cut and paste. That's how I would do it. If the one on core teaching is more up to date, you may need to push from core teaching to GitHub and then pull from GitHub to your laptop. That might be what's going on, but I'm just telling you that if nothing is working, that's how I generally fix things. And also just be on the lookout for any I demonstrated this last week, but you'll have like a number of less than signs and a head, and you'll have 2 lines of code and then lots of greater than signs with a hash on the end. What you need to do is find that block and just work out which line is correct and delete all the other lines. But yeah, I'm pretty lazy. I'll just generally work out which file is the most up-to-date one and just force that change through. Okay, so we're coming up to 9:30. So I'm glad we had a lot of time at the end there just to help anyone out with problems. So if anyone does have problems, please send me an email. Make sure you include some screenshots, especially if there are changes, but your commit button is gray. That's definitely a curious error. I can then probably just jump in and have a look and see what's going on. Also, before you go, if you are sending me a screenshot with brackets, there's this button here that shows the history, and yeah, I can then compare these commits with your commits on GitHub. So that will also give me more of a clue as to what exactly is going on, like where the blockage is occurring. So yeah, 15 days ago, just want to give you some reassurance. 15 days ago, I had some stray commits on core teaching that I forgot I'd made, and had to do a bit of a circular push, getting all of my repositories in sync. And it was because I had actually loaded these external assets. So it wasn't a code problem. It was I uploaded a new font and a new image, and I couldn't work out what file was wrong. And then I just realized it was just some assets. That could also be a thing. Sometimes it's an image that you've added to one repository, but you haven't told all the other repositories. Although, that said, one of the reasons why I'm asking you to put all your media assets in a separate folder is so you don't get those problems. Um, so fingers crossed it's not that problem. Okay, so I'll bid everyone good night, and see you all next week.